Love is all we need. Sounds simple, trite even, especially with all that the world is throwing at us right now. But what if the science tells us this is true? On paper, I shouldn't be here right now. You see, I was a super shy kid. Teachers had to tell me to speak up in class because raising my hand and getting attention caused me so much anxiety that it took away my voice. And if you would have told me then that I would be on stage one day in front of thousands of people giving a talk, this girl would have laughed out loud in your face. I also moved a bunch as a child. Not just different schools, but different neighborhoods and different states. And for a naturally shy kid like me, moving creates its own kind of stress and anxiety. I'd get stomach aches, wouldn't want to get out of bed. Add to that, I was the only black kid, not just in my class, but my entire school, for all of elementary and most of middle and high school. This creates its own kind of stress and pain. I got teased because my hair was different. People would say things like, "Does this rub off?" or "Your skin looks dirty." I remember 2 boys sitting behind me, kicking me, telling me how ugly I was, while an adult sat nearby, heard everything, and said nothing. This is what researchers, neuroscientists, and behavioral psychologists call adverse experiences, toxic stress that adds up over time and can cause trauma. And maybe some of you have experienced these things as well. As the CEO of the Children's Institute, a former educator, policymaker, school board member, and co-founder of a nonprofit anchored in belonging, I know academically and professionally how these experiences can impact you later in life. But, as you just heard, I know it personally as well. I know that things like abuse and poverty can cause trauma, yes, but so can feeling like you don't belong. So can being bullied for things that you cannot control. And so many of our children are experiencing these things right now. And when you experience toxic stress over a prolonged period of time, it can cause trauma in the brain. And when our brains are impacted by trauma, it actually reshapes our brain. It shuts down core neural functions and neural pathways. Now, some of you may be thinking, yeah, I know about toxic stress. I've heard about ACEs. What are we going to do about it? And I'm happy to say that is part of why I'm here before you today. You see, there is one thing that researchers have found can protect us against stress, can actually help us build resiliency in the face of trauma so that our children can overcome hard things. Anybody want to guess what that one thing is? Smart crowd. You got it. Love. Harvard Center on the Developing Child, taking into account personality factors and all other variables, found that a loving and caring adult is the single greatest protective factor that helps children take stress and map it as resiliency in their brain instead of trauma. I'm going to say it one last time. The single greatest protective factor that helps our children take the stress that they will inevitably face and map it as resiliency is a loving, caring adult in their life. Yes, it is not rocket science, but it is game-changing. And when you think about it, if you've never heard this research before, isn't there something inside you that just feels this at your core? You see, we are wired for love. And this is something that both science and faith traditions can agree upon. You see, the more loving, caring adults in a child's life, the stronger and more resilient they can become. School for me wasn't a place that was teeming with loving, caring adults. In fact, it had adults that sat by and did nothing when I was getting teased. But my parents tipped the scales of love in my favor, as did a community of adults around me. And that played no small role in why that shy and introverted girl was able to overcome adverse experiences and be standing before you today. But what if we didn't leave that to chance? What if we ensured every child had access to loving and caring adults starting at birth, or better yet, when the brain starts developing in the womb? Now, some of you may recall a time, myself included, when we could smoke around children, or even while pregnant, because they didn't understand the impact that cigarettes had on the developing brain and body of a child. Well, what if I told you that stress has as much, if not more, impact on the developing brain and body? You see, when a pregnant mother experiences stress, it sends a cortisol response that goes through her bloodstream and into the developing brain of the child. Early researchers are finding a linkage between this and learning disabilities. Epigenetics tells us that the stress my grandmother faced can show up in the cells of my children. Stress is that powerful. And so if we know that stress is that powerful, how are we creating protections around our children and young families to ensure that they stave against that stress? The research gives us a path of hope here. The research tells us that when we surround young children and families with caring and loving adults, they can mitigate this stress. This can make a difference, and this is where hope lies. Love matters. And while love matters at all ages, science also tells us that love has particular significance in the early years. Why? It turns out that the core functions of our brain are developing in the earliest years of a child's life. 90% of brain development happens before children ever reach the age of 5. 80% of brain development happens before children reach the age of 3. Just like when you build the foundation of a house, you want to make sure it's strong. If we're going to fortify our children, then supporting them in these early years are critical. Yeah. So I would ask you to hold these two truths: love and early childhood. And when you look at everything through these two lenses, you begin to see a clear pathway as to how we build a prosperous Oregon and nation. Yes. First, we start with supporting our babies and the mamas carrying them, because their brains are developing. The foundation of who they are, the scaffolding of who they will become, is starting at that age. Second, we make sure every child is surrounded by loving, caring adults. And third, we build our systems around these two principles. Children don't live in isolation of these systems. They are interacting with them the moment they are born. How many of you were born in a hospital? Exactly. And I have lost count of how many mothers for whom the birthing experience alone has been a traumatic event. We can do better. Now, the good news is, better exists out there. We do not have to start from scratch. There are places we can learn from. I had a chance to visit one of these places. I had the opportunity to go on a best practice trip to Helsinki, Finland. Now, Helsinki has some of the best schools in the world, which is part of why I went there. But what's interesting is it's also known as one of the happiest places in the world. In Helsinki, and I will say this, it rains, it was dark, just like Portland. And I thought everyone would look the same, but actually the diversity is very similar to Portland. 30% of the children were children of color and from different countries. Anyway, so in Helsinki, children are given access to quality early learning and care the moment they are born, universally. And their parents are given 12 to 14 months paid family leave in that first year of life. Because, yes, because they understand how important those first 1,000 days are. Third, in elementary school, instead of children switching teachers grade level to grade level, the teacher stays with the child all across the elementary grade levels because they understand how important that loving, caring adult is, not just with the child, but also with the family. And finally, educators there are highly regarded and they are paid well. My friends, we do so much in this state using science to support our climate ecology. What about we use science to support our human ecology? The research and economics alone of investing in our young children builds the case if the other things didn't. There is no greater return on investment on any other part of the continuum of education than investing in our youngest children. In fact, investing in early childhood yields a greater return in this country than the US stock market, dollar for dollar. This just makes sense. So, I want to invite all of you to imagine something different with me. Imagine rethinking all of our systems with this in mind. We can reimagine thinking our housing systems. Did you know that the humans at greatest risk of eviction are babies? How are we building affordable housing and shelter care with them and their young families in mind? How are we preventing them for losing housing? Or how about our healthcare system? 50% of the people on Medicaid are children, and yet we're not prioritizing within the system that oversees them. Add to that, we in this state of Oregon have 9-year-olds that are committing suicide. This suggests we need to radically rethink how we center support and love and care for our young babies. Yeah, we can do better. And finally, our education system. I know so many people have ideas about how we can rethink and reimagine our education system. I think for starters, let's ensure every child that is 3- and 4-year-old in this state has access to quality early learning and preschool experiences when we know that 90% of their brain is developed before they ever walk through those kindergarten doors. And what if we used a microscope of love to look at what quality education looks like? Yes, our babies need to learn how to read, but they need to feel like they belong, because when they do not feel seen and valued, their brains are not actually functioning so they can learn. Let's reimagine education with this at the center. Now, some of you may be thinking, I don't work in government. I don't work with children. What does this have to do with me? Well, this final part is just for you. And we're going to have a little fun. I want you to hearken back to your childhood, and I want you to imagine your favorite superhero. Mine was Wonder Woman. I loved Linda Carter. I loved her bad outfit. I loved her gold bracelets, and she stood strong. I want you to picture in your brain your favorite superhero, because today you are going to get a chance to be a hope hero and love ambassador for children. Today, you get to make the choice to show up as a loving, caring adult in the life of a child. You can make the choice the moment you leave here for lunch. You can sign up to be a mentor, a library reader, a preschool helper, a teacher's aide, a sports coach. You can sign up to be, like my friend Ben said, a foster parent. Our children need us to sign up to be loving, caring adults. Now, you've got to be loving, caring adults for your own children, yes. But I'm talking about our collective children. The second thing I want everybody to do, because some of you might be thinking, I don't like children. I got you. And I want you to keep this in mind. When you sign up to be a loving, caring adult, you actually are giving your superpower to children, which is giving them the gift of resiliency. Imagine that superpower. I also want to say there's a bonus. And the bonus is this. Our Surgeon General has told us that we have an epidemic of loneliness in this country. If a multi-generational approach of older adults working with young children is not part of the solution, I don't know what is. But for those of you who just want to do something else from the side, no matter what role you play, no matter how old you are, no matter what your occupation or whether or not you like children, I want you to ask this one very critical yet simple question. What about the children? What about the children when it comes to rebuilding our beautiful city of Portland? What about the children? What about the children? What about the children? You see, when you make the choice to ask the question, what about the children? When you sign up to be a loving, caring adult in the life of a child, you become the difference between being part of the solution versus being part of the problem. And let's be clear, the problem we're trying to solve is not just about our children. It's about the prosperous future that we want for our state and for our nation. And our children are part of that solution. So, I want you to remember that love matters. Love changes us at the cellular level. It rewires our brains and reshapes them to be resilient when stress and living gives us stress. The stress that inevitably comes our way and in the way of our children, they'll be able to overcome that stress. And when they're able to overcome that stress, their brains are able to learn, they are able to grow, and they are able to thrive. And when our children are able to thrive, they are able to be the leaders, change makers, and innovators that we so desperately need them to be. I know personally the transformative power of love to change a trajectory. And thankfully, our researchers at Harvard and many other research institutions do as well. And as of today, so do all of you. You see, when we start with love, we end with hope. And hope is something we are all in desperate need of right now. And the urgency of love does not understand tomorrow or later, nor should it. Because our children, our beautiful, bold, and brilliant children, they don't need magic. They just need us.